The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tom Glinsky, Chief Inspector with the Board of Pharmacy, and welcome to our webinar today. Our topic is going to be Inspector Tips for your next inspection. With me today is Inspector Lisa Thompson. She's our inspector from Southwest Missouri, Springfield, Joplin area. So welcome today, Lisa.
Hi, everyone.
Before we get started with the program, we'll go through some general housekeeping information. The webinar is designed so you're in listen-only mode. If you have any trouble getting audio over the internet, you can choose to get it over the telephone by going to your GoToWebinar toolbar and checking telephone and then dialing in on the number using the access code and PIN provided. We will be providing 1 hour of CE for this program. You must be officially signed up and logged on to GoToWebinar to get CE. If you're in a room with other people and you're all watching one computer, only one of you will be getting the CE who's logged in. At the end of this program, there is a question survey that you must take. We'll talk about instructions at the end on how to do the survey. And our CE is not reported to the CPE monitor. People always ask me why not. The reason is CPE monitor does not have a method for non-ACPE CE to be reported to them at this time. They're working on it, so hopefully in the future we will be able to report your CE. If you'd like handouts, they're posted on the board's website on the home page under the webinar section. And then we do make a recording of this and post a copy. Usually takes 10 to 14 days. It'll be on YouTube. There's links to the board to these videos on the links bar on the board's website under video webinars. It'll list, that page will list all our past webinars. You do not receive CE for watching past recordings. Time permitting, we'll take questions at the end of the webinar. If you'd like to ask a question, go to your toolbar, type in a question and hit send, and we'll receive it here and we'll see about answering those at the end. So we'll get started today. The objectives were to provide tips and tools to help you prepare for your next inspection, and then also list some of the common observations noted on inspections. There's a couple other objectives I really had when I created this one. The first one was to just increase overall compliance. This is some data from fiscal year 2014 showing you the breakdown of no violations, violation noted, and then inspections that received a compliance notice. And so my goal today is hopefully to get the green section for 2015 to a higher number. I think there's a myth that people think that the inspectors like to find things wrong and write people up. I have to tell you that's not true. Actually, the more we find, it's more work for us back in the office, stuff like that. So we would love everyone to have a no violation inspection. So hopefully today you'll learn something that will get you into that category. The other objective I have is to make it easier on you and your staff for when we do come in. It can be stressful sometimes. Some people don't handle the inspectors being there very well. So if we can come up with some ideas to help maybe lower that stress, have things more prepared, this will be a successful webinar, I believe. I'm going to break it down into some of the tools and resources that we have available. Some common compliance issues, we'll go through those. And then I'll give you some of the tips that the inspectors have to make for an easier inspection. And then, as I said, we'll take questions at the end if we have time. Some of the tools out there are on the board's website. The first one I'll talk about is the self-assessment guide. We have an administration checklist. We have an inspection guide. And then I mentioned we have webinars and past webinars. We have email alerts that have inspection tips. And then I'll talk about just your past observation report can help you with your future inspections. The first one I'm going to talk about is the self-assessment guide. This is found on the board's website. If you're on our home page, on the left is a bar of links, and if you go to publications and resources, it'll take you, it's found on that page. And what this is, it's basically a self-inspection form. It's it's 107 questions and divided into 8 different topics. And these are basically some of the things that inspectors would be looking for when they come out, and it's an opportunity for you to inspect your own pharmacy and find out how you're doing, and if something needs corrected, give you the opportunity to correct that on your own. It's available for CE for pharmacists in charge, pharmacist managers and supervisors, pharmacist owners, and pharmacist corporate officers. Any of those can get 2 hours of CE once a year for performing this self-inspection. There's a page where you don't send us the self-inspection, you just send us a confirmation that you did it, and we issue you CE for doing that. So I'll talk more throughout the webinar about this, because I think it's one of the best guides we have, because it's basically looking at the very same things we do on inspection. So here's a sample of what it looks like. This is a section on licensing, talking about permits and licenses. There's one on safety and sanitation, and then we'll go in a little closer here on the one on controlled substances. And you'll see things, these are exact same things we asked during the inspection. And if you answered no, you weren't doing it right, we actually give you citations on the right on where you can go find it in the law book if you need clarification on what the requirement is. And so like on this, you'll see we're checking for current DEA, B&DD registrations, if you did your last annual inventory on time, if you did a pharmacist in charge inventory on time. 31 is your C2 cabinet locked. 32 has to do with reporting over-the-counter pseudoephedrine cells to the database. And then the bottom is about power of attorney, CSAUS, and order forms. And if you look at number 35, it says review a sample. Throughout this document, it tells you to go actually look at some of the work that you did. This isn't just asking you, do you complete them? You need to go look at a few and make sure they are being completed, especially if you have someone else doing it. You need to be making sure they're doing it correctly if you're the pharmacist in charge. So that's a sample of what the self-assessment guide looks like. The next thing I'll talk about is the administration checklist. This is it's just a guide found on our website. It's found under the immunization administration link. It's a two-sided checklist. One side is dedicated to administration by protocol. The other side is administration by medical prescription order. And it's divided into multiple sections. Here's a sample. This is the administration by medical prescription side. It's actually supposed to be folded up, but when it's on the website, it's just out flat. And then this is the side by protocol. And you'll see on here it's divided into different sections about the protocol, record keeping requirements, notification requirements. These are all things that the inspectors look for during an inspection. And you can use this form, just go down and do a check off to make sure you're doing that correctly. Here's a zoom in on one of the sections about administration records. So it's asking you, are they separate from the prescriptions? Are you keeping them for 2 years? And then it lists the 7 things that need to be on a, 6 things that need to be on a administration record. And then the last one is that you documented that you sent the notification. So it gives you detail and specifically what we're looking for when we're in on an inspection. Next thing I'll talk about on our website is called the Pharmacy Inspection Guide. You can find it on our website under the licensing link. It's a handout. It's actually a handout that was designed that we give out during inspection. So an inspector, before they leave, should be handing out a copy of this to you, and it's just a general resource guide. It's 8 pages long. If you haven't had one in a while, it is on our website. The same one that's being handed out is on our website. And besides being a resource guide, it also gives you some example forms like a compound log, a technician list, and actually we have a copy of the DEA power of attorney paperwork in there. So it has a variety of information. This is what it looks like. It's the front cover, but I'm going to zoom in. I believe this is page 2. It lists all the documents, well, not all of them. It lists most of the documents we would ask for during an inspection. And so when you're preparing for an inspection, this is a good list to go down and make sure that you have them and you know where they're found, or that someone in the pharmacy, if you're not there, knows where they're found. It's divided into general records and then controlled substance records. There's also, we put quick reminders on this handout, and there's just some quick reminders. Have you done your annual controlled substance inventory? Is your CPR certification up to date? Just general reminders we put on there just to kind of jog your memory. Have you done these things? Webinars like today are another resource you can use to prepare for an inspection. The Lunch with the Chief series, just in last year, in 2014, there was 3 of them that I felt that would relate to help prepare for an inspection. We have one related to administration. If you're doing any kind of automation, we had one on the automation regulations, and then a general one on policies and procedures. And they go into more detail, but it does give you an idea what we're looking for, especially on policies and procedures, like which one's required, what you have to annually review, stuff like that is on the webinars. So they're a good resource. Again, you can find past webinars on the board's website under the Publications Resources link. Inspection tips, these are published short little tips that we put out. They're either on an email alert or maybe possibly in the quarterly newsletter. They're usually a current issue that's has come up affecting inspections, and it's usually something that affects many licensees. And we put them out there just as it's a quick way to get something out as a reminder to licensees of a current issue we're seeing. And it gives you a heads up that if it's on an inspection tip, it's probably something the inspector is going to be looking for on their next visit. Here is a example one. This is on the email alert for, I believe it was on New Year's Eve. This one came out talking about controlled substance inventory requirements. And we learned after a pharmacy had been inspected by the DEA, there was an issue brought up about the format of how they took their annual inventory and how they accounted for the product they have. And so we decided this was probably something that most pharmacies may not have been aware of, so we put it out on an email alert just reminding you to make sure that your inventory form does contain all the required information. Past observation reports, I think, are a good source to prepare for your next inspection. The inspector comes in with a document showing the history of your pharmacy. I can guarantee you they are going to look at the things that were on your last inspection to make sure you corrected them. So this is where I would always start with making sure I'm prepared for my next inspection, because I can guarantee you this is one thing they're going to look for. So previous inspections, especially if you're a new pharmacist in charge and weren't around for the past one, you can pull up, find the previous inspection and look over and make sure everything's been corrected. I'm now going to switch and tell you about some of the most common compliance issues we see on inspection. They're in no order and they're in no volume. I mean, they're just randomly in here, so none of them are the top compliance issues. But these, taking a poll of the inspectors, these are the ones that came to mind asking the inspectors on what we're seeing the most issues with right now. So I kind of got them divided into different sections. The first one I got is drug inventory. Outdated drugs are always, we always seem to find those out there. Again, have a methods to make sure someone's checking your outdates and pulling them, and make sure they understand what they're looking for. Expiration dates, return to stocks, anything like that. Make sure they understand. Some of them just go in and look at stock bottles and the expiration date and never look at return to stock or repackaged vials. So make sure they understand what they're looking for. Drugs stored outside of the temperature range. Usually this has to do with the refrigerator. Stuff that should be in the refrigerator isn't, or we actually find drugs that are in the refrigerator that should not be in the refrigerator. The other thing is the refrigerator not set at the right temperature. It's important to make sure someone's checking that and adjusting the refrigerator. The freezer, with Zostavax, we find more and more pharmacies who do have a drug in their freezer now. Overfilled stock bottles, this is a very common occurrence on inspection. The inspector finds a bottle that contains more tablets or capsules than what's on the label. It means someone has combined drugs somehow to get that in there. Again, usually it's education of staff issue to make sure staff knows they're not supposed to be combining, they're not supposed to be pouring back return to stock vials into stock bottles. Repackaging, labeling issues, expiration date's always an issue. It's 12 months or less if the manufacturer's is less. Your labeling should have drug name, manufacturer, distributor, lot number, and expiration date on anything that's repackaged. I will tell you we will take the NDC number instead of manufacturer and distributor, since that does identify the manufacturer on it. Month, year expiration dates. This was on an email alert, I believe, early last year about pharmacies that use this. For example, today, if I repackage something today and put an expiration of 1/16 on it, I've actually given it more than 12 months. So if you're going to do this, I would recommend putting the actual date you repackage it in there, or the other one is cut it short and do the month before. So for something repackaged today, put 12/15. You'll lose a little bit of expiration date, but then you don't have to change the system you're doing. So again, it's an education thing. Educate the technicians on proper expiration dating. Return to stock prescriptions, again, they have a maximum of 12 months expiration date from the date they were repackaged, unless you know it would be different. Missing the required information on the label or covering up that information is probably more commonly seen. You're required to have the prescription number, the name of the drug, and the date it was filled, and leave that so we can read that on there. Technicians sometimes get carried away with a black marker trying to scratch out a patient's name and go ahead and take out information that shouldn't be, that needs to be on there. Records, some of the things we see with the records is failure to keep them for the required time. A lot of our records are 2-year records, but there are some things that fall outside the 2-year. Prescriptions are still 5. Some of the things with administration protocol and MTS protocols are longer, but failure to keep them. Records, distribution records are another issue. This is either you're receiving product or sending product out. A lot of times they forget to record stuff or realize they have to record it. Some of these have to do with like interstore transfers or borrow and loan situation, maybe with another pharmacy in town. A borrow loan transaction is actually 2 distribution records, one when the pharmacy loans it out, and then another record when the other pharmacy returns it. So you have to record those things since they are distributions. Unable to locate electronic records is becoming more and more of an issue as more and more records go electronic. We're finding staff unable to find them or know where they're located when we ask to see them. So I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but that's, I would say, becoming a very common issue on inspection. Failure to notify the board of off-site record storage. Still having issues with this. If you're storing confidential records off-site, you must notify the board and comply with a rule that tells you how to do it. So inspectors should be asking you a question if you have any records outside the pharmacy. If they're prescription or other confidential records, then we're going to ask, have you notified the board office of that? So that's it for records. We'll move on to policies and procedures. Again, this is probably another very hot one because we're just having more and more policies and procedure requirements as pharmacy expands into new things. Failure to have the required one. These are people that just don't realize that they're doing something that requires a policy and procedure. Unable to locate it, or especially if it's electronic. As more and more people go to electronic policies and procedures, people have trouble finding specific ones in their policies. Not following your own policy and procedure, we see that happening. Missing required topics. All of our regulations, when it says you need a policy and procedure, list the minimum of what needs to be in it. So you need to make sure your policy and procedure covers those. And from a survey of what was done, the most common issues with policies and procedures deal with these three, I believe. Delivery, that was a requirement from a couple years ago that you have a policy on delivery. That includes mail-outs, long-term care policy and procedure requirements, and Class J shared service requirements. Those are the three probably that get cited the most having an issue with policies and procedures. Sanitation, dusty shelves. Usually it's the bottom shelf that's usually the dusty, and if you're any kind of open window like a drive-up window, they seem to be dusty, more dusty than the other ones. Reconstitute film master tips dirty. This is a common one. As things get reconstituted, the tips touches the suspension and leaves a pink, usually pink, a pink film of that. It's a common issue. Open food, beverage in the refrigerator, freezer. Again, you can keep sealed, manufactured sealed products in there with the drugs, but once they're opened, or if you're bringing a sandwich from home or anything like that, you need to have it segregated in another refrigerator or freezer. Controlled substance issues. Missouri is a state that requires C2s to be under lock, so either they're not under lock or the door's not locked or the cabinet's not locked or the keys are in the lock. Even though it's locked with the keys in it, the B&DD did tell me they did consider that to be a deficiency in security, leaving your keys in the locked C2 cabinet. C3 through 5s can be dispersed, but if they're not dispersed, they must be under lock. Most common thing with this would be overstock or outdated drugs. We see them a lot of times just thrown in a box. If they have C3 through 5s in them, they need to be locked up since they're not dispersed in your inventory anymore. Dating controlled substances when received, again, it's a federal requirement. CSOS orders not electronically checked in and unable to retrieve CSOS orders. This goes back to my issue of electronic records. You know how to order stuff on your system, but you may not know how to pull up past CSOS orders to show the inspector. Controlled substance inventory issues. Missouri requires one to be taken every year, so we see people taking it past the year. There is no grace period in Missouri law. B&DD requires one not to be over 12 months old. Missing drugs, some common ones would be missing your pseudoephedrine, your over-the-counter pseudoephedrine, which is a C5. Compounding ingredients, sometimes we find testosterone powder and stuff like that that's never been inventoried. If you're a new pharmacy, failure to take an initial inventory, we note that. And this year, or actually last year in 2014, we had 2 different scheduling with tramadol and with the hydrocodones, which required a special inventory be taken. And then just the requirement to note the time of day taken on your inventory. Just some controlled substance dispensing issue, dispensing a C2 after the date, the do not fill until date. Mid-level practitioners, oversight physician not on the prescription label. This is a BNDD requirement. If you're filling a prescription for a mid-level practitioner, a nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant, if it's a controlled substance, the physician's name must also be on the label. Accepting e-prescribed prescription that was converted to fax. This is still an issue, but I'd say it's declining as more and more pharmacies are able to truly take an e-prescription. And then dispensing greater than the quantity limits allowed by law. Missouri is a 30-day supply on a C2 without a medical reason. With a medical reason, it's 90 days. C3 through 5s in Missouri is a 90-day limit. Testosterone vial is probably the biggest culprit here. A 10 ml vial being dispensed most time is more than a 90-day supply. BNDD has clarified before that you cannot exceed the 90-day supply, and you cannot use the reason that that's the smallest package size you were able to get. Compounding, requirement to have a compound log. Either the log failed to log something, or the log isn't completed correctly, or it's missing requirements on there. Expired ingredients on the log. This is a common problem. I would say at least twice a month I see an inspector issuing a compliance notice for what appears to be the use of an expired ingredient, or assigning a beyond use date greater than your ingredient's expiration date. Some of this times it's just record keeping issue. Other times they've actually have used an expired ingredient. It's amazing how often this occurs. Active ingredients on the prescription container. Our rule requires that you list the active ingredients. It doesn't have to be on the label. It has to be somewhere on the container, so you can use an auxiliary label to get that on there. Failure to log commercially compounding kits. The first kits that is compounding, you do need to log those kits. And then flavoring, if you are flavoring, we do not consider that compounding, but we do suggest that you write on the prescription or somewhere what you did to that prescription by flavoring it. So keep a record that somehow that note that you did add some flavoring to a prescription. Sterile compounding, I'm not going to go in great detail here, but training is probably one of the #1 issues. Failure to document it or actually provide the training. The rule requires that they have some kind of initial training, the people doing sterile compounding. The rule requires annual aseptic technique validation. Again, people go past the 1 year, or they hire someone new and fail to do one before they start. Primary and secondary environmental control certifications, your hood and your clean rooms need to be done every 6 months. Assigning a beyond use rate greater than what the risk level your compounding is allows. And then failure to have a compound log. Sterile compounding still requires a log. You won't see that in the sterile compounding rule. You fall back on the general compounding rule for the log requirement. Pharmacist administration. Lack of documentation that you sent your notifications to the protocol physician or the PCP, or failure to do that within the required time frame are the 2 most common things related to notification. Your vaccine administration record is missing some of the required information. This is where that checklist helps. Just pull the checklist out. You can tell if your records have everything that's required. Protocol not date and signed. Every year we find 2 or 3 times that a pharmacist is working on a protocol that hasn't been signed. And by medical prescription order, the most common thing would be failure to have a statement that the pharmacist may administer the drug or vaccine on the prescription. Some other miscellaneous ones would be technician list, missing or not up to date, pharmacies in a shared service arrangement without Class J or following the class shared service rule. Quality assurance issue, that is when the board inspector, by reviewing the prescription, finds something that appears possibly to be an error in something that has been dispensed, the wrong directions, wrong strength. We have a form that we give and ask the pharmacy to complete when we find those. And failure to offer patient counseling, another common issue. Going to move on to tips from the inspectors on how to prepare for a inspection and how to make it go smoother. Be proactive. Use all these tools that we talked about to help prepare in advance. Again, the self-assessment guide, I believe, is a great one. It's a self-inspection, do it yourself, and you can even get CE for it if you're a PIC or one of the others that I mentioned. Read the email alerts. I talked about inspection tips out there. Inspection tips are a hot current topic on inspections when they come out. House Bill 600 suspensions. This is people who are suspended due to tax reasons. The email alerts is the only notification the board sends out on people who have been added to the suspension list. These people, once they're added, they no longer have an active license. And I will guarantee that vast majority of employees do not come in and tell you that they got a letter from the board saying their license was suspended. You usually don't find out that way. So you have to be proactive and make sure you're checking the email alerts for new additions to that list. If you're the pharmacist in charge, don't assume, you need to verify. If you have others in your organization who are responsible for certain things, you need to be the one verifying that they're doing their work and doing it properly. I'll give you a couple examples of that. Technicians who are, their job is to record the temperature on the refrigerator, and they do that every day, but they didn't know that they were recording a temperature that is outside of the acceptable range for the last month because no one ever told them what is an acceptable range. Also had a technician recording the negative pressure on a clean room every day for multiple months outside of the range, and again, no one ever told them what the range was and when to alert the pharmacist in charge of that we got a problem with either the gauge or with our clean room. Pharmacists in charge need to be active in operations. I have been in pharmacies that I can tell you the pharmacist really is not involved at all. They rely on everyone else to answer questions for them related to compounding, sterile products, where records are kept. If you're not involved and you're the pharmacist in charge, you're setting yourself up, I believe, for failure. I've been in sterile compounding pharmacies where I'm asked to pick to please go over the gowning procedure you use, and they had to look to the technician to tell them, which leads me to believe that the pharmacist in charge doesn't know how to do it. So how can they make sure that their technicians are doing properly if they don't know actually how to gown? So again, you need to be active in the operations. Observe the pharmacy. Just walking through the pharmacy on occasion and just looking around, you'll find all kinds of things. And I'll just show you some pictures of some of the things you might find. Unlabeled vials on the shelf. This is usually caused by a robot, some kind of dispensing machine is usually where this comes, but not always. But you need to, just walking around the inventory, you'll see stuff like this. It'll tell you something, someone doesn't know what the proper way to do something, maybe further training is needed. I don't know if this shows up well, but this is my favorite thing is pharmacists and pharmacies using tape as a lid. And as you can see here, Inspector found one, and you'll see when you turn it over, the capsules actually stick to the tape. And then this is another one. They went a little further. They actually put a vial cap on and then taped it on. But tape is not an appropriate closure for a stock container. Look in your refrigerator and freezer. There's always stuff in the refrigerator and freezer of interest for inspectors, but here's one where the Zosavax is sitting next to a Wendy's malt. This is just some dust. I was going to say, I think everyone has a good idea when it's time to start dusting, when you can write your name on the shelf, or the products that haven't been used have a quarter-inch layer of dust on them. But these are things that just walking around the pharmacy you can see, and you'll say, hey, it's time we need to take corrective action. Don't wait for the pharmacy inspector to come in and say your shelves are dusty. Here's one where actually the drugs are on the floor. These are stock bottles on the floor of a pharmacy. Another thing I didn't have a picture of, but just loose tablets and capsules on the floor. I always find that, especially with a robot, looking around the robot. When it comes to sanitation, I always ask the pharmacist in charge, if your local investigative TV reporter stuck a camera over your counter, would you have any concerns of what they saw in your pharmacy? So think of it from that perspective of, would the public be concerned seeing stock bottles or loose pills on the floor of a pharmacy? Here's a C2 cabinet unlocked. The inspector opened it up and to show that it was unlocked during the day. Again, this is something very easily you can go check yourself by walking through the pharmacy and just looking around. Review the work of staff. Again, I was telling you about the examples of the temperature log and the pressure log, but you really need to go out and look at what people are doing and make sure that it's being done correctly. And here, I'll give you a couple examples. This is taken off the screen of a robot, and when the inspector pulled up to see what lot and expiration dates were in the cells, we noticed a trend that it appeared that the lot numbers were all made up. You see the numbers repeat a lot. There's only like one or two on here that appear to be maybe a valid lot number. So if you never go look at people's work, you won't know if it's being done, and this is what the inspector will find when they come in. How would you like to have your whole robot considered misbranded drugs because you don't know what lot number in? That would be quite a financial hit, I think, to the pharmacy. So review the work. I told you about compound logs. Here's an example of a compound log that the expiration date of the ingredient was 2/15/11, but it was assigned a beyond use date of 5/22/11. A technician filled it out, and in this one there's actually two pharmacists, may have been the same pharmacist each time, but there was two pharmacists checked and no one caught that. And this is what I'm talking about. It's a common occurrence for us to find compound logs that the pharmacists are just initialing without reviewing to see what's on them. And sometimes these pre-populated computer-generated compound logs, that you don't get the ingredients, lot, and expiration updates, so it just keeps printing them over and over again. And then other times we actually find that they are expired ingredients being used to compound. So go out and review some of the paperwork that's being done. Look at the administration records. Pull up a couple vaccine administration records to see if everything's being filled out correctly. You need to be prepared. You know we're coming. We're going to be there one of these days to your pharmacy. So know the location of the records. I told you in the handout there's a list of the most common records we ask for. But you need to have a plan for when the person who knows where they're at is not there. We walk in, there's floaters, there's relief pharmacists. They really have no idea where the records are. They're going to rely on technicians to help find them, and if they don't know, usually they're making a phone call to someone, and it causes a lot of stress in the pharmacy when people can't find records and the inspector's standing around, you know, waiting on stuff. So have a contingency plan. Make sure you know where the records are and other people know where they're at. And along this line is know how to retrieve electronic records. Again, this is becoming more and more of an issue as not being able to retrieve them in your system. You can't rely on the inspector to know how your system works and to find your records for you. Organizing records is a good idea. It just makes the inspection go much easier if you have all your records that we want in one place. Now, sometimes you can't do that, but if you have a mechanism to do that, Some people use a storage container or a special location to do that. And here's an example of a box that with hanging folders in it that they store a lot of they call them regulatory records. Not all of them are stuff that we look at. Some are related to other regulatory agencies. But when you use one of these, the inspector knows, if I can just find that box, I found a lot of the records. I don't even need to ask you because I can look through those hanging folders and find a lot of it. It's less stress on your staff. We don't have to bother you. So places that do boxes, totes like this, I think they have a smoother inspection if they're using it properly and they're putting things in there. Sometimes we find this box and then we find 6 months of the invoices that were supposed to be in there piled up somewhere else. So if you don't use the box, it won't be as helpful. But I like the box idea. It does make for a smoother inspection. Using a calendar reminder system to remind you of certain dates. Now with smartphone, emails, all these systems have some kind of calendar on them. You can set up reminders. Even if you have to do a paper one on the wall, it's better than nothing. Have some kind of reminder of special dates, like when your permit's going to expire, or when your pharmacist license expire, interns and your technicians, when their license is expired. You know, when we come in on June 5th, one of the things we're looking for is how many technicians did not renew their license. So you can be proactive and already have taken care of that issue before we get there. Your BNDD registration, your DEA registration, you can set reminders up for that. Set a reminder up for your annual inventory. Your Compact Meth Act self-certification, that's an annual renewal process. You can set a reminder for that. CSAW certificates have an expiration date that coincide with your DEA registration. We really don't have to worry about this one because if your certificates go expired, you can't order anything and pretty much shuts you down. So, monthly PIC review of the OTC sales log, you can set a reminder up for that. Policies and procedures, these are the ones that require an annual review. So you could set a reminder up to make sure you get these reviewed on an annual basis. Administration, the protocol, annually you got to get a new protocol. You have to annually send a notification of intent in. Easily those can be set up on a calendar. Your CPR certificate, most of those are 2 years. But I don't know if all of them are, but that's another one that needs to be renewed. If you're sterile compounding, as I mentioned, aseptic technique validation, and then the certification on your hood and your clean room, set a reminder up for those. Educate and train your staff. If you never train your staff, then you're pretty much setting yourself up for failure. You need to make sure they understand what they're to do, how to do it, and why they're doing it. Like with the refrigerator, they're checking to make sure the temperature is within the required range. It's not just, I got to go record the temperature every day. After an inspection is a good time to have staff meetings and training. You have issues that were brought to you by the inspector. It's a good time to have retraining for those issues. When new regulations, a webinar I do comes out, there's new stuff on it, it's a good time to have a staff meeting and train your people. If you have new employees or floater staff coming in, you need to make sure they're properly licensed. And this is just not floater pharmacists. I've seen technicians that float. I've also seen technicians who are trained at another store and then move to another one with the assumption that, oh, they must have a license because they were working at the other ones. Do not assume someone has a license. You can easily verify licenses on our website or in applications pending. You're supposed to have a copy of those. But do not assume people that come into your store are properly licensed. You need to make sure you verify that. And then another issue with floater pharmacists is to make sure they have a valid protocol for your pharmacy. We've had pharmacists float from across the state who we know are not in the same 50-mile range for their protocol in the other state, so they have to have a current protocol on this side of the state. So just a reminder, if you have new and floater staff coming in, make sure they're properly licensed. If you're a new pharmacist in charge, again, I mentioned earlier, ask for previous inspection reports. That's going to tell you what the issues were on the last inspection. You can make sure they're done. And I highly recommend that you do the self-assessment guide. You're doing a self-inspection, you can find out what issues there are in the pharmacy, and you can get 2 hours of CE for it. We're now going to take questions, so hold on just a second. We'll switch to that mode.
Okay, we've got a bunch of questions today. Our first one is, what is the difference between an observation and a comment?
And they're referring to our observation report. That's the paperwork we leave at an inspection. An observation is what we consider is a more serious, it's something we found that was deficient, and we write that, and that's at the top of the page. Comments are things we find maybe not as serious, that we're just going to maybe either write a note about it, or we're maybe not even get written down, and we're going to give you a verbal comment about it. And then the other part of this is a compliance notice, which would be written as an observation, but it's serious enough that the board would like to hear back from you on how you corrected that issue. So that's the difference between an observation, a comment, and a compliance notice.
We have a question about a list of policies and procedures. How would somebody know if they needed a policy and procedure for something? Is there a list of topics?
What, the best way to find out, if you watch the webinar I did last year, we'll tell you which ones you need to have, and then the specific topics you need to have are, and the vast majority are spelled out in the regulation itself. But if you watch my webinar, it goes through those. The practice guide on our website has a section on policies and procedure, and it has a list too of the required, which ones you have to have. I do not believe it goes into the topics that you have to have for each one, but it does give you a link to the regulation where it can be found.
Okay, we have a question about CSAUS. Somebody is asking about their wholesaler not having an option to electronically check in their CSAUS order, and they're wondering if it's acceptable to print out the electronically generated 222 form and then fill that out.
Our understanding from the DEA, that is not acceptable. The regulation says that it must be checked in electronically and linked to the CSAUS order that you sent. There's different ways to do that, but you need to check with your wholesaler or who's ever providing you the CSAUS and ask them, and you can look that up in the DEA regulations and show that to them and ask them how they comply with that. But that, according to what we understand from the DEA, that is not acceptable.
Can you explain what is exactly a notification of intent?
That is for someone doing administration by either protocol or by prescription. Once a year they have to notify the board that they're going to do it and that they met the requirements for it. It's done electronically on our website. But you have to do one for each type, protocol and by prescription order. So it's just a notice to the board. The regulation requires you to notify the board once a year that you intend to do immunizations or administer drugs.
We have a question about the protocols for administrations. The 50-mile rule, is that radius or by road?
The way we determine it, we go to Google Map or MapQuest and we put in the two addresses and see. So we go by road.
About the combat methamphetamine, if a pharmacy is not selling over-the-counter pseudoephedrine, is it necessary for them to complete the annual combat methamphetamine self-certification?
My understanding is no. That's you only need to do that if you're selling over-the-counter. So you would not be, if you're in a locale that has the restriction and prohibiting that, then you wouldn't need to do that.
Does the board staff need to be notified of records stored off-site that are older than 2 years?
Okay, need to be some clarification here because the regulation only allows you to store records that are over 2 years off-site. So if you have records younger than 2 years, you shouldn't have them off-site. We're talking confidential prescription records. So yes, if you have records, you're going to store them off-site, you have to notify the board. We have another question, what are the requirements for off-site storage? It's found in section 20 CSR 222-2.010, the general requirements. There's a section in there that talks about off-site records. You have to notify the board. The site has to be secure. It has to have an alarm, and you can't have anything over under 2 years there. It has to. You just send notification to the board. We don't have an online mechanism or a form to fill out for that.
Can you explain exactly what a dormitory style refrigerator is?
My understanding, it is a refrigerator freezer where the freezer is not a separate compartment on its own. So a dormitory style one is one where you open up the refrigerator door and then you see a compartment inside that is the freezer compartment. I believe that is my understanding of what it is. If you go to Merck's website, it talks more in detail, I believe, about storage of Zostavax. So you might want to look there.
Question about return to stock products. Somebody thought that they had been told that return to stock expirations were 6 months.
They're actually, it's 12 months from the date it was dispensed into that vial. So no, it's 12 months.
A question about controlled prescriptions. Does the oversight physician on the label apply to all controlled prescriptions?
The question is the oversight physician for a physician assistant or a nurse practitioner in Missouri, if they write a controlled substance, your prescription label has to have their name and also the physician, their oversight physician's name on there. That is a BNDD requirement. So it applies to all controlled substances written by either of those two mid-level practitioners.
What's the length of time for regular prescription records and the time for controlled substance records?
Assuming that what's the length of time you have to keep them. Missouri law is 5 years for all prescription records. That would include controlled substance prescriptions. DEA and B&D is actually less at 2 years, but ours would be longer at 5 years for all prescriptions. So hard copies have to be kept. However, you can now with imaging, we do have a rule that allows you to image the hard copy instead of keep a copy. That may not apply to all controlled substances prescriptions, so you want to double check on that. But basically 5 years is a record requirement by the Board of Pharmacy.
For off-site storage for a pharmacy chain, do we notify the board each time we send records from a store, or just the first time we set this up?
Basically the first time you set it up, you're just going to tell us the location where you're going to store the records, and once you do that, you're done unless you change locations. Now, if you're a chain, you have to notify us for each store in your chain that is going to be using that site. If you need to notify the board of a mass notification, you can contact the board at pharmacy@pr.mo.gov, and that'll go to the desk of who does that, and Laura can tell you the best way of how to send us a mass notification.
Regarding return to stock medications, is the dispense date on a return to stock bottle good enough, or must it say expires by this date?
We don't require expires by this date. We go by the date, the dispensing date. So that's all that's required by us on there.
In a long-term care facility, if a medication is sent out from the pharmacy to the facility in a unit dose packaging, but returned unopened and sealed, can the returned medication be redispensed in a new unit dose package to a different patient?
Well, the rule says you cannot repackage it, so I don't know what you mean redispense in a new unit dose package. You cannot take something out of a bubble card and repackage it in another bubble card. If you're using the bubble cards that have the unit dose system underneath it, when you rip it apart you have individual unit dose under there, you can, but you can't, the general requirement is you can't repackage anything and reuse it. The only exception to this would be if you're doing multi-med pack dispensing, you are allowed to take something back and repackage it for a therapy change. But a standard bubble card, single drug bubble card, you cannot do that.
What do you recommend as the length of time to store prescriptions, considering that Medicare even has requirements now?
Well, I can only speak for the Board of Pharmacies with this 5 years, but yes, it's my understanding that Medicare does require longer, so I would suggest you follow them. Well, we're about out of time. We're going to have to end the webinar here. I do need to just tell you, just a reminder, the board in conjunction with the Center of Patient Safety is doing a patient safety survey. It's been on the email alerts. Yellow postcards were mailed out last week. Everybody should have got one of those. We're encouraging everyone to complete the survey. And it's on our website also. There, if you go to our home page, there will be a link to the survey. It's an online survey. So I encourage everyone, if you haven't taken the survey, please complete the survey. Okay, just a reminder, if you want CE, when I close the webinar, you'll get a window that comes up and says the webinar has ended. You have to close that, and then a survey will pop up with 5 questions you need to answer. We have been informed that smartphone and tablets do not always receive these. If you have problems receiving the survey, you can email compliance@pr.mo.gov, and we will email you the questions. If we do that, you must get them back to us within 48 hours to be counted for CE. The board office will mail out certificates. I say 14 days, it may be longer than that, but we will get you certificates. And again, we do not report currently to the CPE monitor. So I'm going to now close the webinar, and you should have a window showing up saying the webinar has ended.